The clinking of wine cups and fine silverware are the most common sounds in the Palais de la Cité. After all, what saintly king wouldn't choose to spend his time wining and dining? When your kingdom is in an unprecedented time of peace and prosperity, what is there to do except celebrate? Accompanied by the lords and ladies of his court, Louis of House Capet, ninth of his name, King of the Franks, Duke of the Normans, and lord over everything from Flanders to Burgundy, is seated at a sumptuous dining table within the extravagant royal palace. Polite laughter and dignified chatter surround him, but he hears none of it. Only the 37-year-old Marguerite sitting at his side notices his pensive countenance. More than just another young queen, this dark-haired beauty personally led the Seventh Crusade in 1250 after her husband was captured at Damietta, making her a leader in her own right. That previous experience explains the king's less than enthusiastic demeanour at lunch. He is currently poring over sheets of parchment detailing accounts of taxes and treasuries in preparation for launching his next crusade. As the new owner of several relics of Christ, including the crown of thorns itself, Louis IX has to get this right. If he fails, the Holy Land will remain in Muslim hands, the Kingdom of Jerusalem in Acre will fall, and all of Christendom will be at risk. If only he had a crystal ball, he would never board that ship to Tunisia in 1270. But now, in 1258, he is determined to succeed. I'm Matthew Ryan, Aussie author of the historical fiction novels of Till Time, and your host and guide. Sit back and relax as we dive into a world of mighty palaces and romantic knights on our tour of medieval Paris, on There's a Time and a Place for That, Episode 6, The Isle of Cows, Part 2. The left bank of Paris spreads out behind us. We have returned to the Petit Pont after our exploration of La Bièvre and the Sorbonne, the abbeys of Sainte-Geneviève and Saint-Germain, and the exciting medieval fair beyond the city walls. Now, the remainder of Ile de la Cité and the right bank wait to the north. As we cross, we can see more people than before walking the streets, now that it is past noon. Most are heading in the opposite direction to us, wishing to spend their day at the Saint-Germain fair after a morning of hard work, making it a little difficult as we walk against the crowd towards the elegant Palais de la Cité. But finally, after a few minutes, we reach the westernmost quarter of the island, and the full grandeur of the French monarchy rises up before us. Tall walls, in a classic crenulated medieval design with pointed towers, stretch out to either side, behind which we can see the huge, glorious Sainte-Chapelle. Beyond that, hidden behind the walls from street level, is the royal palace itself, home to King Louis IX and Queen Marguerite, along with their court. The Palais was originally built by the Romans at some point prior to the 4th century, but the current buildings were put up during the reign of Robert the Pious, the second king of the Capetian dynasty, around the turn of the millennium. Ever since then, it has been renovated and added to by kings such as Louis VI and VII, Philip Augustus, as well as the current Louis. It covers an area of 6 acres, double if we include the gardens on the far side. Eventually, after the fall of the monarchy during the Revolution, the Palais, renamed de Justice, will serve purely as the site of the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court, and the Judicial Tribunal. We walk towards the gate in the 10-metre-high, 3-metre-thick walls, making our way along the first street to be paved in Paris. Philip Augustus apparently hated the smell and mud so much that he specifically paved all the streets outside his home. He probably could have just bought an air freshener, but whatever. Passing beneath the gatehouse on the eastern side of the palace grounds, we come into the Cour Jumet. This courtyard is about 50 metres deep, perhaps 70 wide, and is centred on a small square of earth surrounded by stone paving. In May, a large tree will be ceremonially planted here to signify the arrival of spring, but at the moment it is empty, leaving our eyes to be drawn to the most magnificent sight in the entire palace, La Sainte-Chapelle. At 36 metres long and 42 high, it is nowhere near as magnificent as Notre Dame, but it is just as beautiful. With soaring windows and buttresses, it feels as though the entire building could float up into the sky, creating a second sun with a brilliant stained glass rose window above its entrance. We are looking at it from the north and east, so the 8 towering windows we can see curve around the apse at the end of the chapel. The windows are formed from 2 smaller arches topped by 3 trifoils, a shape made from 3 circles that overlap like a Venn diagram, and the lower sections have their glass panels separated by thin lengths of stone, known as tracery. Atop each buttress stands thin spires, their edges covered in frills not unlike the petals of the fleur-de-lis, the heraldry most associated with the French monarchy. Above them, a tall roof slants up, meeting in the middle to form a keel upon which stands a spire at least 20 metres tall. It is far thicker than the small spires on the edge of the roof, but as it tapers higher up, it begins to develop those same frills down below, an iconic element of fancy Gothic architecture. We move around the apse, heading south, and come to the Cour de la Sainte-Chapelle. This courtyard, larger than the Court of May, fills the space between the Sainte-Chapelle and the southern wall, bordered on the east by the smaller chapel of Saint-Michel, and to the west, eventually, by the walled Jardin du Roi. As we walk through it, surrounded by various nobles and knights in the finest of robes and dresses, we pass by various elite guards assigned to protect the king and his palace. These guards form the core of the king's army when he rides into battle, an act done infinitely more in the Middle Ages than the modern period. Royals such as Prince William of the UK may have served non-combat roles in Afghanistan and the Atlantic, and others such as Princesses Elizabeth of Belgium and Leonor of Spain may have undergone military training, but it is unlikely we would find them beneath the Oriflamme banner while a force of English longbowmen loose a storm of arrows towards them and their knights, especially if it were muddy. Medieval royalty was certainly made of different stuff, maybe not better, but different. Their guards are the same. Over a padded linen shirt, these guards wear a leather coat called a gambeson, a shirt of chainmail with an attached chain hood, a thin blue tabard, and finally, a breastplate. Such armours are a novelty in 1258, and only the richest warriors can afford them, or those with the richest employers. On their head, over the chainmail hood, they wear a bucket-shaped helmet with breathing holes and a narrow visor to see through. Most carry a sword on their hip, but have spears in their hands while on guard duty. Don't worry, although these warriors look right scary up close, they are only on the lookout for threats to their king. They won't bother us. Returning to the Sainte-Chapelle, as we come around to its western facade, we see a sight similar to that of Notre Dame we saw last episode. However, there is one difference that obscures much of what we immediately see. An extension to the facade, somewhat like a porch, hides the doors and the rose window from directly below. As we step back, we get a better look at the rose window, which only generally resembles that of Notre Dame. The window is divided into 6 sections, separated, as usual, by elegant stone tracery. These sections are made up of 3 tessellating teardrops, one with the round end at the centre. Each of these is also divided up into the same 3 teardrops, and each teardrop contains over a dozen pieces of stained glass that describe the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, paying close attention to the crown of thorns and the cross. We'll see why momentarily. We can see 3 arches that lead into 3 doors on the actual facade, a setup replicated on the ground floor. The difference is in who can access which floor. The lower half is for ordinary folk, which includes nobility, while the upper chapel is reserved for the royal family only. Were we in the upper royal floor, we would see that the tall arched windows are made up of stained glass circles that show biblical scenes alongside images of battles, royal processions, and other important French events. It would seem as if the walls are made entirely from stained glass, as the supports for the roof are cleverly hidden and spaced out across over 100 slender columns all the way round. The soaring interior would glint in gold and rainbows at us. We would walk along a floor tiled with arabesques and fleur-de-lis before reaching the massive reliquary. This is the heart of Sainte-Chapelle. The purpose for which King Louis built this chapel, beginning in 1242 and finishing 10 years ago, was to hold the relics of Christ which he had purchased from the Latin Emperor, the ruler of the Crusader state which had taken over the Byzantine Empire following the sacking of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade. These relics are some of Christendom's most valued, and they are stored in a long display case of silver, copper, and gold leaf at the altar of the upper chapel. Principal among these relics is the crown of thorns worn by Jesus during the walk to Golgotha, along with 2 fragments of the cross he died on, the spear used to confirm his death, the sponge with which he was fed vinegar, and the image of Edessa, a small portrait of Jesus painted on a cloth. A further 16 relics, including Christ's blood, his funeral shroud, and the heads of John the Baptist, Saint Blas, Saint Clement, and Saint Simeon rest within this case. Altogether, they present the King of France with a unique boast, that he is God's chosen king, the most devout ruler in the world, and first among the defenders of Christendom. Of course, this is all in the upper chapel, and as simple common folk we are not allowed up there. All we can see as we walk through the intricately detailed doorway on the ground floor is the lower chapel. Despite being a mere 6.5 meters from floor to ceiling, it is still a magnificent space. The ceiling is vaulted, with each column contributing 3 ribbed arches, and buttresses going from these inner columns to the outer ones on the far side of the aisles. Much of this space is painted in blue and red, with gold leaf accentuating the edges of the arches and columns. Here we find the fleur-de-lis symbol of the French monarchy together with the castle icon of Castile, the homeland of Louis's mother, Blanche. Aside from the arched windows at the apse, this chapel is illuminated through more semicircular windows along the nave, all stained glass, of course. Emerging from this glorious chapel, we continue north towards the palace itself. The open courtyard here is surrounded by the Merciers Gallery, which is a double-storey building running between Sainte-Chapelle and the Grand Hall, the Conciergerie, the main court of law in the Palais, and the royal residence itself. Within the square, just outside the Conciergerie, is the Grosse Tour, or Massive Tower, a 13-metre tall, 11-metre wide donjon that acts as a defensive keep for the palace. Beyond the personal apartments of the king and his family to the west are the expansive gardens on the tip of the island, featuring long hedges, blooming flower beds, and shaded orchards filled with the bright aroma of various fruits. All of these buildings are tall and narrow, with high gabled roofs and arched features found in all Gothic architecture. As we pass through the narrow porticos surrounding the Conciergerie, named for the administrator given control of government when the king is away on, say, crusade, we find ourselves in a large forum-like space decorated with columns and archways. Here we can see various nobles sitting on benches and talking beside flower beds, all parts of the Parlement of Paris. Parlement essentially means to speak, from which our modern parliament, as the voice of the people, is derived. Of course, in the Middle Ages, no one cares about what the people have to say, and this Parlement is the voice of the nobles. More importantly, it acts as their court of law, above those that judge the people, consisting of 3 barons, 3 prelates, 19 knights, and 18 law experts chosen from the University of Paris, as we saw last episode. The Parlement comes from the Conseil du Roi, or the King's Council, made up of the Dauphin, or Crown Prince, the Constable of Paris, the Chancellor, the Bishop of Paris, and a few other members of powerful noble families and high-ranked priests within the church. This council advises the king and, previously, judged matters regarding the inheritance of nobles and the awarding of land, which are now under the Parlement's purview. We can find the members of the council within the Salle du Roi, or Royal Hall, just east of the conciergerie. This building is massive, featuring 2 naves joined together, amounting to a length of 75 metres and a width of 35 metres, while the roof stands atop 3 stories. This is essentially the public side of the palace, and its halls are used as a throne room, a banquet hall, an audience hall, and as a court presided over by the king. Speaking of, as we wander through these magnificent, spacious halls, we see a man dressed in luxurious robes of deep blue and cloth of gold cloak, his nearly shoulder-length blonde hair crested by a sparkling crown. Aged only 44, he is a king in his prime, and under his rule, France has prospered greatly. Around him are gathered members of his council and other higher nobles, along with the ever-present elite guards sworn to defend their liege lord's life. Among his retinue are 2 other important men, the Dauphin and future King Philip III, and Charles, the king's brother, Count of Anjou, Maine, and Provence, as well as future King of Sicily and Prince of Achaia. In a court dominated by ambitious nobles, these 2 are perhaps the most ambitious, but there are probably no men in France that Louis would trust more. We watch, as do the other people in the royal hall, as the king and his retinue make their way past, heading towards the council chambers in the northern side of the vaulted and colonnaded hall. Once they are gone, conversation and gossip begin again, noble voices echoing all throughout. Outside the Salle du Roi, we return to the Cour du Mai, Sainte-Chapelle ahead of us, the wide staircase leading up to the Galerie aux Messieurs on our right, and the gate we entered through on our left. We exit out onto the street, turning left, and head towards the bridge across the Seine at the corner of the palace walls. As we reach this bridge, known as Le Pont au Change, we can see that a number of small shops are set up along its edges. These shops are primarily jewelers, goldsmiths, and money changers, and their location allows them to advertise directly to the rich people leaving Ile de la Cité, or to those coming through towards the more vibrant neighbourhoods up north, in particular Les Halles. This wooden bridge leads directly to the Grand Châtelet, a name which ironically refers to a small castle or châtelet that is big. To be fair, a petit châtelet was built somewhere else at the same time, back in 1130, so they needed to differentiate it somehow. The Grand Châtelet is a large square fortress surrounded by a moat that connects to the river Seine, with 3 courtyards to the west, east, and middle. A square tower stands at the corner closest to us, while a circular donjon rises up further north, and shorter keeps take up the western side. All of this is built in strong limestone with ashlar covering it, rising up about 35 metres over the surrounding townhouses of Ventre de Paris. With the construction of new city walls further west, the Châtelet no longer serves a defensive function, and has since become the headquarters of the Provost of Paris, the bailiff in charge of the police and justice system within Paris. The dungeons beneath the Châtelet are notorious for their brutality, so make sure not to end up in one. The Provost also organises the city watch. Men from the middle class are picked to patrol the city, with 48 of them posted at various places of import, and 12 sergeants patrolling on horseback during the day. 20 sergeants on foot are added to the roster at night, and together, these 80 men guard a city of 160,000. As we continue east, further into the residential heart of Paris, we pass a number of mills beside the grain docks on the Seine, before reaching La Place de Grève. This large square is home to a sizable bakery on the west, a series of market stalls outside a tavern on the north, and the Maison aux Piliers on the east. This large office building is currently home to the shipping guild, called the Parisian House of Water Merchants. In a century, it will serve as the headquarters of the Provost of Merchants, who governs the economics of Paris, along with the self-important guilds in a similar way to how the Provost of Paris works the judicial system. The Maison is almost a palace, about 3 stories tall, with several gabled roofs that cross and meet at various points across the top of the building. Large arches, in the common form of Gothic architecture, pierce the front at ground level. By the time of its reconstruction in the 1500s, it will be known as l'Hôtel de Ville, the town hall of Paris. This robust system of centralized bureaucracy the French kings will come to employ will serve as a template for many other European nations in the future, leading eventually to the end of feudalism and its inefficient version of local government. However, before it becomes the seat of Paris's mayor, the square it stands on will begin serving as the principal site of executions in Paris, starting with the heretic and mystic Marguerite Poré, who will be burnt at the stake right here in 52 years. But the square is more than just a grim reminder of the ease with which criminals were sentenced to death. As we head further north, up the Rue Sainte-Avoye, we will notice that the quality of houses and shops here far outstrips that of the left bank. Within the last 100 years, the wealth and power of the middle class has increased exponentially, and we can see the greater variety of commercial products available to Parisians here as a result. Fine wines, game meat, exotic herbs and spices, and beautiful pieces of crockery and metal dining ware are visible on stalls and in shops all around as we pass through the square's market. Further west is La Boucherie with a capital B. Here, cuts of beef, veal, and pork are sold en masse. All of these places serve the more refined tastes of the nobles who have the townhouses here, but also the merchants, artisans, and bankers who are also settling in large numbers throughout the fancy neighborhoods of Le Marais. About half a kilometer up the Rue Sainte-Avoye, we pass the small church of the same name and reach the wall of Philip Augustus. Directly ahead, passing through the 6-meter-high, 3-meter-thick wall of stone, is the Porte du Temple. Walking beneath this large gate, we come to the more open farmland that surrounds Paris proper, and in the distance, our next destination shows itself. It's a few hundred meters off, but amongst single-story farmhouses and barns, it kind of stands out. Slowly but surely, we come closer, until before us stands the mighty fortress of the Knights Templar, introduced to us in episode 4 back in Jerusalem. This crusading order was formed centuries ago, when knights and monks joined forces to help defend the brand new crusader states created after the First Crusade, and guard the pilgrimage routes leading towards Jerusalem. Their influence and power has since spread across Europe, turning them into a powerful force against heresy and corruption, as well as some of Europe's richest landholders and bankers. Built roughly 20 years ago, the fortress consists of a large walled area with various gardens, fields, and a house used by the temple commander. At the southern end, we find the 50-meter-tall keep, made from a square tower surrounded on all corners by round turret towers, all pointed at the top. This fortress, built to serve the crusading order formed 140 years ago, is their principal headquarters in Europe. In scarcely 50 years, it will be their tomb. The French king, in massive debt and seeking to take the order's properties and vast wealth, will use his influence over the papacy to convict the Templars of heresy, among other things, disbanding them and sending many members to the gallows. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, will be burnt at the stake just offshore from the royal gardens at Palais de la Cité 7 years after that. But at the moment, he is only 14 years of age and living in Burgundy. We walk through the gate, which is found on the southeastern side, and pass the commander's house as we walk around the perimeter of the keep. As with most, if not all, medieval castles, it is ringed by a moat of stagnant water, above which the wall slopes inwards in what is known as a glacis, before vertically rising up to its 5-story height. Within this fortress, some of the greatest treasures and relics of the Templar Order are stored away, and its high-ranked members live, sleep, eat, and work in the offices, bedrooms, and meeting rooms set up inside. As we round the northeastern corner of the keep, another pair of towers come into view. Much smaller and forming a gatehouse of sorts for the main tower, these form the Tour de César, and it is within its cells that the French royal family will be imprisoned come the Revolution, before being sent one by one to the feared guillotine. On that pyre in 1314, Jacques de Molay cursed the king's family to the 13th generation, and in his very own castle, the 16th generation would finally fall. Only a little off. Beyond the smaller towers, where a drawbridge falls across the moat, a number of other buildings are clustered together in the north half of the enclosure. First among these is the church. We can't expect crusaders to not have their own personal church. It's a typical example of Gothic churches, though far more utilitarian than Notre Dame and Sainte-Chapelle. The pointed bell tower is built beside the chaplain's house, both attached to the apse of the church. Surrounding it are the dormitories for the knights and men-at-arms who live within, along with kitchens and dining halls. At the very north, surrounded by a smaller wall, we find a training yard centered on an armory, from which emanates the sound of swords and shields being smithed by the order's craftsmen. Forming a harmony with these hammer blows are the grunts of exertion and striking of steel on wood as the Templars train hard to prepare for their fight against the church's enemies. A fight which has just become exponentially more energized. Only days ago, word arrived in Paris of the brutal and total destruction of Baghdad, capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, by the Mongols of the Ilkhanate in mid-February. Some Christians see this surging empire as a key ally in defeating the Muslims, and this sacking has galvanized them to a degree, but many more remain skeptical. It hardly helps that the Golden Horde, the Mongol state in control of everything from Kazakhstan to the border of Poland, is ruled by a Muslim convert who is eager to continue the expansion into Europe. In many ways, the Mongols are a wild card, just as likely to be the foes of Christianity as they are their friends. Whatever the case may be, the French Templars must be ready for deployment to the Holy Land to defend the interests of Christendom. We leave through the western gate of the temple, emerging into the vibrant farmland outside Paris, and head west. Only a short distance away, no more than a single farm's length, is the abbey and priory of Saint-Martin-des-Champs, or Saint Martin of the Fields. The size of this monastery rivals Saint Victor's on the other side of the Seine, and its wealth is second only to the royal abbey of Saint-Denis further north. Two large cloisters stand next to a huge church built in the more outdated Romanesque fashion, though its bell tower is topped by a suitably Gothic spire. Fields of grain and rows of grapevines fill in the space between the abbey and wall, and we can see many black-robed monks working diligently in their little piece of farmland. They are members of the Cluny congregation, that franchise church that is spread out from the Seine Valley, which explains their successful real estate portfolio. But physically, this abbey is no different than the ones we have seen on the left bank of Paris in the previous episode, other than being much newer, so we will pass it by. Beyond it, across farmland to the west, is the convent of Filles Dieu, or the Daughters of God. The nuns here were once some of Paris's most desperate women, willing to sell their own bodies just to survive, but with the monetary support of the king, they have been converted to a pious life, serving in hospitals and sewing clothes for the poor people they once shared the streets with. South of their small convent are the two churches of La Trinité and Saint-Sauveur, both built in the Romanesque style of simple triangular facades and two-level roofs. And south of them, we return once more to the city wall. We pass through the Porte Saint-Denis, for the road we walk down leads far north past the hill of Montmartre to the town of Saint-Denis. From where we stand, we can see the hill upon which Saint-Denis died, and in the distance, the 86-metre-tall spire of his basilica, built by Abbot Suger, where Saint Genevieve had once built the first chapel dedicated to France's most important saint. Almost immediately, as we approach the gate back into Paris, the street becomes crowded as people are converging on the gate from the farms around us, or dispersing back out to their fields and orchards. Why the dense crowds of farmers and commoners at this particular gate? Well, as we wander down the street past the Abbey of Saint-Magloire, we arrive at the eastern end of Les Halles, a marketplace larger than even the fair of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. At the opening to this plaza, however, is quite the tonal shift. In approximately 2 BCE, 2 years after the birth of Jesus Christ, since it is believed that the calendar of Anno Domini, giving 1 AD as Jesus' birth year, is actually inaccurate, the king Herod the Great of Judea ordered that all boys aged 2 or less in the vicinity of Bethlehem be murdered. Herod was attempting to kill off the prophesied King of Kings in the same way that one might burn down an orchard because one apple had a worm in it. As the Bible states, Jesus escaped this massacre, but the murdered boys were considered the first Christian martyrs, known in French as les Saints Innocents. Named in their honour is La Cimetière des Saints Innocents, or the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents. This open space, about 150 metres long and nearly 100 wide, is accompanied by a Gothic church on its eastern side and surrounded by a 3-metre high wall to prevent people walking through. As we respectfully enter this space, we notice that there are quite a number of gravestones and crypts close to the church, inscribed with names and dates from the previous century. However, as we continue through, it becomes clear that individual graves have gone out of fashion. For those who can afford it, there are other cemeteries that provide a better resting place, but with the growing city creating a growing population of poor and homeless Parisians, and the nearby Hôtel Dieu killing off more patients than it saves, it just isn't practical to have individual graves for everyone. The solution, of course, is to dig a big pit and just kind of put everyone in there at once. It's macabre, naturally, but in the Middle Ages, death was everywhere. People weren't as bothered by it back then. Each pit could hold over 1,000 bodies, and once it was full, they would cover it over and dig a new one nearby. We can easily see the mounds created by this practice as we continue walking through, with a visible dip in the ground west of the newest lump. It's to the south, so we don't need to walk too close as we make our way towards the exit to the northwest, which is surely a relief. Eventually, after centuries of plague and war, the cemetery will fill up far too much, and the bodies of medieval peasants will be disinterred and moved to Montparnasse, a hilly neighbourhood to the south with numerous limestone quarries that tunnel beneath the suburbs of Paris. These subterranean spaces will prove to be the perfect resting place for these old bones, and they can still be seen there today, with roughly 2 million skeletons stacked in the infamous Parisian catacombs. A word of warning. The tunnels there are narrow, as much crawl space as walkway, and it may not be a smart idea to adventure through them unless you wish to join the skeletons. Emerging from Saint-Innocent, we find ourselves in an enormous square about twice the size of the cemetery. A chapel, built in Gothic style and dedicated to the Roman martyr Saint Agnes, sits at the far corner of this muddy plaza. No cobblestones are laid here, with only planks lining the walkways that crisscross an immense marketplace. This is Les Halles, the metaphorical and literal stomach of Paris. Some areas are covered by a pair of market halls, from whence the name Les Halles comes from, but the rest is protected only by cloth canopies stretched over independent stalls. Almost immediately, we find ourselves face to face with a display made from baskets and crates, showing off apples, white carrots, since orange ones have not yet become popular, and cabbages. Very quickly, as soon as we are in talking distance, a man in plain linen clothes and a slightly grubby apron begins yelling at us. Far from the often fake politeness and persuasion from the staff of a modern shop, selling produce in the Middle Ages was more about aggressive coercion aimed at making customers feel like they have no choice but to spend their money. He is quite insistent that his vegetables are the freshest and tastiest in the city, but as the merchant manning the next stall along yells at us, he is wrong, and his food is garbage. The first man tells him, with all the politeness of a medieval peasant, where he can put his own vegetables, before turning back to us and demanding we buy some apples. But we have already moved on. In a few years, the provost of Paris, Etienne Boileau, we'll publish some new rules governing the marketplace and the guilds, and such tactics as shouting at customers who are already being shouted at by another merchant or discrediting the produce of others will become illegal. Can't happen soon enough. There are roughly 100 job titles referred to by Etienne in his Book of Trades, and many can be found here in Les Halles. It began life as a grain market, but has since moved to various other foods, including wines, barley beer, vegetables, baked bread, salt, fruits, herbs and spices, olive oil, and meats, though the Grande Boucherie to the east is still the main market for that. But beneath the two halls built in this marketplace, we primarily find textiles for sale. These open-sided, shed-like buildings are filled with stalls selling silk, lace, carpets, canvas, linen, wool, and various pieces of everyday clothing. Specific tailors would deal with the kind of fancy clothes worn by the nobility, but here we can see the plain tunics and hosiery of the commoners on display, mainly in simple white, beige, brown, and grey, but also the brighter colours of green, blue, red, and yellow. In time, a new building called the Halle au Blé will be built on the market grounds as a storage area and goods exchange. As a massive, round, domed building, it will essentially serve as the beating heart of Paris, until it is pulled down in the 1970s and replaced with a brief shopping centre nicknamed the Whole of Les Halles for its extreme ugliness, that has since been rebuilt in a more sensible manner. We continue walking through the market, taking in the omnidirectional wall of sound and the vibrant blend of smells that comes our way. It's not all bad. The smell of fresh bread and beer is enough to drown out the fish and rotten food, at least at times. All around us, we see men and women, even children, with a variety of styles of clothing from nearly all walks of life, all looking to purchase food for the day or to find something new to wear. Others are discussing news, either local or international, or hoping to snag a couple of purses from the belts of customers, since pockets haven't been invented yet, and money is simply hung from a belt or around the neck. We even see a young man desperately haggling down a jeweller, one of the few to set up shop in Les Halles, to purchase a ring with which he can propose to his lady love. Their lives are as vibrant and as complicated as ours, and here in Les Halles, those lives come together in a magnificent dynamic scene. A few hundred meters west, we walk along the base of the wall, drawing close to the river. There is a small neighbourhood of homes and farms outside the wall here, with rolling countryside beyond that. The sun, now gently lowering in the direction of the western horizon, is blocked by the wall, but we can see a slight glow where it reflects off the castle that stands just beyond the fortifications. Standing up against the wall, right on the edge of the Seine, and built between 1190 and 1202, at the same time as the wall by Philip Augustus, it is the pinnacle of 13th century fortress building, amplifying the original meaning of the name in Old Saxon, fortified camp. In time, it will be an art museum, complete with an ornamental glass pyramid in its courtyard, and before that, a royal palace. But at the moment, the role of the Louvre is purely defensive. And what a role it fills. At the western end of Paris, right in the path of any English army wishing to take the capital, the Louvre forms a formidable obstacle to any conqueror's plans. A gate in the wall leads across a sizable moat before reaching the main entrance of the Louvre, which stands between two large towers. Similar towers stand at each corner and in the centre of each wall, with a second pair on the southern side. These walls are 2.6 metres thick, made from heavy stone, and rising up to crenulated tops 8 metres off the ground. As we enter the courtyard, which is about 52 by 56 metres, we are immediately greeted by a tower, 15 metres in diameter, 30 in height, with a conical top and a circular wall around it. Not quite a glass pyramid. This is the keep of the Louvre, the central defensive position, surrounded by a dry ditch within this inner wall to make it even harder to take. In fact, the only time this fortress will fall to invaders is the one time England takes Paris during the 100 Years' War in a couple of centuries, at a time when France was divided and the city was already under Allied control, so there wasn't a fight. Anyway, Taking the Louvre right now would basically be impossible. If you managed to avoid the arches and the scalding hot oil, overcame the outer watery ditch, which is 10 meters wide, climbed both sets of walls, crossed the 9-meter dry ditch, and finally got into the circular keep, you would still need to fight up a clockwise spiral staircase, forcing you to expose most of your body to swing your sword. Unless you're left-handed. Point is, it's nearly impossible to conquer. To the south and west, the inside of the outer walls have buildings built up against them, serving a few different purposes. We find here a simple chapel, in which the soldiers guarding the Louvre can pray without leaving their post, especially in the case of a siege. There is also the large ceremonial hall used for royal feasts and treaties and such, eventually called the Salle Saint-Louis. In the future, it will serve as the site of the First Estates General, the closest thing France will have to a House of Representatives for 500 years. Other rooms serve as an armory and barracks, as to be expected in a fortress such as this, and beneath these a large number of prison cells. Finally, there are a set of more comfortable rooms occupied by the royal family in case they need to evacuate from the Palais de la Cité, which they permanently did in 1358 during a brief rebellion by the Provost of Merchants. After that, the Louvre served as the royal residence, especially once a new wall was put together further out from the current fortification, rendering the Louvre pointless as a purely military structure. Ultimately, the Louvre would be renovated, destroyed, and rebuilt many times before the modern era, using every architectural style imaginable in the process, and transforming it from the fortress to royal palace, and, finally, to a museum, a lasting reminder of the history of Paris. As we ascend the stairs on the inside of the outer wall and reach the battlements at the top, we can look out at the glowing countryside to the west and the dense urban sprawl to the east. The temple stands ominous to the north, while to the south, the dazzling Notre Dame Cathedral turns an ordinary city into an unmistakable skyline known the world over. In 1258, during the murkiness of the Middle Ages, Paris is a lively, prosperous beacon of European culture. While its future is fraught with plague, war, and radical revolutionaries, make no mistake, this city will endure all of it. Thanks for listening to episode 6 of There's a Time and a Place for That. I hope you have enjoyed the sights of Sainte-Chapelle, Temple, and the Louvre, and have learnt something about medieval life. If these magnificent monuments have caught your interest, why not share this podcast with your friends and family, and leave a comment as to which places you enjoyed and what you want to see in the future. Your feedback would be much appreciated. If you haven't already listened to them, you can also visit ancient Rome, the Eternal City, and the hallowed grounds of medieval Jerusalem in the first 4 episodes of this podcast. If you enjoyed exploring medieval Paris, you might also enjoy reading Till Time, a new series of time-traveling historical fiction novels. Set in accurate portrayals of various times and places in the past, the books follow best friends Ashton and Imogen as they explore and adventure through the kinds of settings visited in this podcast. 2 books are out right now, The Sultan's Siege and The Frankish Field. This second book has them join forces with a royal assassin as they fight against spies and kings, delving into a version of Paris set 4 centuries back from the time explored in this episode. More books are soon to be on their way, but for now, you can find these first 2 installments on Apple Books, Google Books, Amazon Kindle, Kobo, and Barnes & Noble. Links to all of these can be found through the link tree in the description of this podcast. Thank you again for listening to There's a Time and a Place for That, The Isle of Cows, Part 2, and I'll see you next time.